It's funny. Humility is rooted in trust and vulnerability. That's at the root of it. And people think humility is like this false modesty or self-flagellation. Humility is just the acknowledgement of what is true.
Pat, welcome to the podcast. I am thrilled to meet you.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. I wish we had recorded the last 20 minutes of us
Me
talking
too.
before
Me too.
But this is the first time we were meeting, and it's a blast. And Matt told me that he goes, "You're going to love this one, Dad. This is my son works with me," and he said this is going to be a great podcast, and I can already tell.
Oh, Pat, thank you. Well, it's really a treat, and like I told you in the last several minutes that we were chatting, I have long admired your work. And really today, I'll just kind of set the meta-narrative. Folks, if you're listening today, lean into this. This is where I'd love to take this, Pat. My hope is that we can empower the folks joining with us to begin to understand their gifts and their frustrations in a way that you call their working genius. Now, this is in fact the title of your latest book. So here's where I'd love to start. With all of the personality assessments available to us today, Enneagram, DISC, Myers-Briggs, what are you hoping to help people realize with the working genius? I'm fascinated.
I love this question because it's the one I would be asking. Does the world need another assessment? And later on, we'll probably talk about it. You'll be glad to know I didn't come up with this because I thought the world needed one. I didn't know that. I was just having my own struggles, and it came about in my own work. So it was by accident, which I think the best things get discovered that way because it's just a pure pursuit of the truth, not trying to manufacture something. But here, I love all those other assessments. I'm a junkie on those.
Me too.
And we use them in my practice and all those other things. But I was never quite sure how to translate the results of those assessments to actual work. And it was like to the activities, to the specific work activities I was doing in a day. And that's at home, that's at church, that's at the office. It's like when you're getting things done. I'm an ENFP, what does that mean? I'm a high I, lower D, what does that mean? This is purely about the gifts God gives us in accomplishing tasks. And that sounds very unsexy, but some tasks give us joy and energy. I mean, sometimes somebody says, "Would you do this for me?" And you're like, "Would I? I'll do it all day for you." And other tasks, 10 minutes of doing them will crush us of our joy and energy. And so it was in my pursuit of figuring this out for myself that I discovered this. And one of the things we find, Chris, is that executive teams, when they look at their results in literally 10 minutes, they're like, "No wonder that failed," or "No wonder you're in the wrong role," or "I thought you were struggling because you had a problem, but we just have you in the wrong job." Mm-hmm. And so the speed of applying this to real work, whether it's a team reorganizing or understanding who to hire, or a person not feeling guilty or judged anymore because they just aren't naturally gifted in a certain area, the speed of application to real work, that's what this is all about.
Okay, so this makes me curious, and I'll just use DISC as a framework for the question. Regarding DISC, they say half of the personalities out of the four dominant types are more task-oriented than people-oriented. The other two, of course, are people-oriented versus task. Does that mean in some cases, say the high D, the high C on the DISC style would light up certain quadrants of the working genius that would maybe require more focus, more dedication from the people-oriented styles? I don't know if I asked that quite right, but
I think I know what you're getting at, and it's difficult to. We have found that there is actually not a correlation.
Okay.
Because we've been looking for that too. We're like, okay, there must be a thing like most people who are Fs in Myers-Briggs, and this is so much about the things you do and the tasks that that people with the same Myers-Briggs type or the same DISC type could have completely different working geniuses, which is really good because. There's a guy I work with, we're both ENFPs. And he was like, "Well, Pat, you're an inventor. That's one of the things we have here. You come up with new ideas." And he was like, "I don't do that." And I thought, what's wrong with me? We're both ENFPs. How come you're inventive and I'm not? And this explained it. So then he could let go of that and say, "I want you to do that." And I could say, "Hey, you have a gift that I don't have, even though they're the same Myers-Briggs type. And I want you to spend more of your time doing that and freeing me up from that so we can both live in our geniuses." So I don't think, now we're only 2 years into this. We've had, far over 250,000 people take this, and the data has been overwhelming in terms of face validity and clarity. But I don't think there's a correlation.
Okay. Well, that's really helpful. How then, through the context of this podcast, which is mental and emotional health, how does Working Genius fit into this niche? Like, what's at stake or even possible for folks joining us today?
Well, I love this. I alluded to this a moment ago, but here's what this is really about. We go through life experiencing unnecessary guilt. Now, I'm a follower of Jesus. There's a place for guilt. Guilt is a conscience, and we need to. But guilt around things we're not supposed to be guilty around is not good. That would be the evil one. And people will go through their entire lives feeling guilty, and that robs them of emotional and mental health. And when they get freed from that by understanding where that comes from, it is like, I'll tell you a story. I was a kid, and my dad used to wake me up in the morning on Saturday mornings and make me go mow the lawn with him. And when I say make me, he made me. I mean, he was like, hey, that's what you're going to do. You're a kid. You're going to mow the lawn. That's okay. That's right. I hated it, though. I loved my dad, God rest his soul, but I really hated it. And I thought, I'm a bad son. Why do I not enjoy doing this with my dad? I must be lazy. And he probably at times was wondering, like, why is this kid not good at this? Why is he, it wasn't just that I wanted to be inside watching cartoons. It was that I realized this literally 2 years ago, so 50 years after the fact, that the way he organized, the way he wanted me to serve him was completely aligned with the things I'm the worst at. So there's different ways to mow the lawn. There's different ways to be a CEO. There's different ways to be a pastor, to be a parent. And if you go about that job playing into what we call your working frustrations, the areas where God did not give you gifts, you are not going to succeed, and you're going to probably attribute that to some character flaw when it's not that at all. So I felt like a bad son for years. And it wasn't until 2 years ago that I realized, oh yeah, God just didn't wire me to be a helper in that way. And it changes so much. I mean, my first job out of college, Chris, was at a management consulting firm, and I got the job everybody wanted. Literally, the number one job in America that year. They said, if you're a college grad, this is the best job to get in America. And somehow I got that job. And 2 years later, I left. I was not successful. And I thought, okay, I'd been successful in my life until I graduated college. I was a fraud. It wasn't real. I guess I'm not that smart. And maybe I am lazy. And the work they were having me do was the same work my dad had me do in mowing the lawn. It was exactly the wrong thing for who I am. But I left there and carried around that failure, which caused self-doubt and caused me to question my character. And so many people, Chris, have taken this test and looked at their results right away and said, oh, that's why that happens. We've had people call and say, I thought my wife hated me because when I did something and she reacted this way, I thought she was kind of against me. Yes. And then we realized that was her genius. She was actually doing what God prepared her for, and she was trying to help me. We've had other people call and say, I was about to fire this employee, and then he took the Working Genius, and I realized I don't need to reject this guy and get him out of my organization. I just need to change the kind of work he's doing. Those stories are the most amazing things that we've ever encountered in our company. People realizing who they are, being able to tap into those things, and that is so central to mental and emotional health. So that's a long answer to a really good question, Chris.
If we were to go down the rabbit hole just a little bit more, and I so appreciate you sharing, because I'm unabashed, even though this podcast is mental and emotional health, I'm unabashed about bringing the kingdom and the dynamics of the kingdom into this conversation. So extrapolating from what you just shared, which was so good, what I hear is a possibility when we understand it, our Working Genius, is it can decouple shame from our internal narrative. In other words, like you said, in your case, you're not working from guilt. You're not working from insecurity. You're not working from, let's just say, a place of obligation, but rather a sense of calling, from a sense of purpose, where shame is now unhooked from the internal narrative that says, if you were better, not in your performance, just you by yourself, innately, if you were a better person, you'd be performing better. Right. Any thoughts on the correlation between that? That's fascinating to me.
Well, yeah, and I mean, and God loves us for who we are because he knitted us together in our mother's womb, not for our performance. And if we don't know how to receive that, that's related to wounds and everything else. But if we don't know how to receive that, then we naturally go to performance and I have to earn it. And that's its own problem. And that's the bigger problem. But then if then in our performance that falls short, then we naturally go and attribute that to a lack of character or virtue. And that's just a recipe for a cycle of shame.
We're going down the whole road, the wrong road, right?
Absolutely. And the evil one, that's exactly what he wants. I think it's, one of the things is what I love about this tool is that I want to know what I'm terrible at and why as much as I do what I'm great at. I want to be able to go to work and go, hey, you guys, you know something? I'm terrible. I stink at this. You know it, and I know it. I try to cover it up or try to overcome it through grit. And though I realize sometimes I have to do things I don't love, but you and I let's celebrate the fact that I suck at that.
Yeah.
And let me celebrate the fact that you're great at that. And let me give you permission to admit what you suck at so that we can see God made us to need one another. And if we think we're supposed to be all things to all people, why do we need anybody? So coming to terms with our deficiencies is a great way to know Jesus because he's right there with us in that moment. But that requires some knowledge of what that is. So like I like to talk about, Chris, that, our geniuses are the gifts God gave us, and we have to know that they're there and open up the gift and use it. I think it's good to know what he didn't give us too. And there's things he didn't give me, and I used to feel like, well, that makes me a bad person. And as we talk about the actual model, there's one of the things I'm really bad at that as a Christian, it makes me feel like, oh, that makes me unvirtuous. And now I realize, no, it's not virtue at all. It's really just gifting.
That's so good. I will put a pin in this because one of the things I want to talk about, I took the assessment yesterday, and
yeah, I got your results right here.
Yeah, and you can take me into the operating room. I think this is going to be fun.
Can't wait.
But one of the things, and again, like I said, we'll put a pin in this. But one of the things I noticed in one of my working frustrations is that I thought, oh my gosh, I do this one particular thing often. I do it really well, and it shocked me that it came up as a frustration. More on that later.
Yeah, Matt and I talked about that this morning.
Yeah.
Like there's a few explanations for that. So we'll talk about that.
I'm going to have fun with this. Okay, well, let's just set a primer then. Walk us through, Pat, your 6 geniuses. And I do want to emphasize for folks, because I think sometimes when we take personality assessments, it can sort of be nerve-wracking, like, oh, crap, I don't want to be labeled as that, or I don't want to be that person, or I don't want to be whatever. But I find it fascinating that we're talking about 6 areas of genius. And that's really encouraging to me. So let's just start there. Let's walk through the 6 geniuses. Then we can get into the weeds with this application later.
All right. And here's the thing. The reason why there are 6 is because these are the 6 activities that are required in doing any kind of work. Anything, whether it's like starting a company or launching a program or planning a family vacation or building a house or any kind of activity, any endeavor requires these 6 things. And 2 of these 6 things are what is called your genius, where you get joy and energy. And you can hold, in those 2 areas, you can hold your energy for hours and hours because it feeds you. And you might eventually get tired, but you're not going to be drained and exhausted. You're going to be energized, but you might need rest. But it's like pouring coffee into a Yeti mug and screwing the lid on tight, and it's going to hold that heat for hours and hours and hours. 2 of the geniuses will be not your, 2 of them will not be your gifting, your genius. They'll be called what we call your competencies. And that's like stuff you can do. It doesn't feed you necessarily, but you're pretty good at it. And it wasn't that hard to learn. So if from time to time you do it, you can enjoy it for a while. It's the coffee cup that you put the lid on, it holds the coffee for a while hot, and it gets cold eventually. The remaining 2 are your working frustrations, which you alluded to earlier. And those are the 2, it's like pouring coffee into a cup that has a hole in the bottom. where it drains you, and even having to do it for a short period of time is very much of a challenge. Now, that doesn't mean that all of us aren't going to sometimes have to do things we don't like. It just means that if you put yourself in a position or a job or in a role that's calling you to do that a lot, your prospects for engagement and success and joy are low. Or no, in fact, they're nil. Okay, so let's go through the six. I just wanted to explain. It wasn't like we just made up six. And I'll do them in order of how they happen in work. And I want people to think about it as starting at the highest level in terms of altitude, like your head in the clouds, and going all the way to landing on the ground, right? So at the highest level, the first step in any kind of work involves the genius of wonder. The genius of wonder, the W. And the genius of wonder is there are people that wake up in the morning and God wired them to wonder, to ponder things, to look around the environment and seek potential and to ask questions. And they are looking for, like, is this really the best it can be? I wonder if there's another way we could do this. Maybe there's a different way. Is this really what our customers want? I don't know. Should we go on maybe we should go someplace new this year on vacation. Or is this really the kind of house we want to have? You know, every new activity, somebody wonders. And as a result of that, it begins. Now, the funny thing is, though, people with wonder, and we hear from them all the time, say most of their life they've been criticized for this. People are like, why are you asking questions? Why don't you just get on board? You know, we don't need to hear this. And it is absolutely a genius. Some people are born with it, and they're often not affirmed in it, and that's a really bad thing because it's critical. This whole project started because I had a person that worked with me, and she was a wonderer, and she saw me kind of struggling, and she said, "Why are you like that, Pat?" And she asked that in a very kind way, like, "Why do you get so frustrated by some of these things?" And I said, "I don't know, but I want to figure it out." And if she hadn't asked that question, I wouldn't have moved to the next step. So when people have wonder, and I'm looking at your results right now, wonder is one of your competencies, so you can relate to it. It's not one of the things you do first, but you can relate to that. So can I. But that's the first one. So somebody has to wonder. The next one is invention, the genius of invention, the I. And people with the genius of invention, this is one of mine, and that is they are born to come up with new ideas. In fact, they wake up in the morning doing that. They can't help it. They do it even when it's not necessary or helpful. And it's their best thing is a blank whiteboard and a pen and a problem to solve.
Wow.
And like when somebody says, "Hey, can you help me? I need to come up with a better idea for whatever they want." I'm like, "Oh, I can't wait." Because that's how I'm wired. It's a gift God gave me. It's not something I should be falsely modest about. It's not something I should brag about because I didn't. It's a gift. And so humility is saying, yeah, I am good at that, and thank you, God, and letting other people know I can help you by using that. Some people just love to come up with new ideas out of nothing, and I'm one of those. Okay, I have a feeling that might be one of the areas that you were surprised at, but I'm not sure. We'll talk about that in a second.
Sure.
The next one, though, after the wonder and the invention comes a really critical one that a lot of people don't think about is the genius of discernment. People with discernment have incredible gut feel. They have great instincts and intuition. They see patterns. They have pattern recognition. They're integrative thinkers. And it's not magic. It's just not linear or based on data.
Sure.
It's people that they just have good. You go to a person with discernment and you say, "Hey, what do you think we should do?" And their answers are usually right on in spite of the fact that they don't have knowledge or data about it. You can trust their gut.
Yes.
And it is absolutely a genius. It's absolutely a genius. One of the people in my office, I love to use her as an example. Her name is Tracy. And Tracy has incredible discernment. She's the person, like, if you're in my house and I say to my wife, "Hey, Laura, where should we go on vacation this year?" Or, "Should we refinance our house?" Or, "What do you think about this outfit for this client? Should I wear this?" She'll say half the time, "Have you asked Tracy yet?" Because people go to Tracy because her judgment is so good. And I remember saying to Tracy one day, "Were you like that as a kid?" She goes, "Oh yeah, all my girlfriends when I was a little kid used to ask me for my advice." And it's absolutely a God-given gift. There's those people in the world. Tracy might not know anything about financing. She has a little bit of knowledge, but she's like, I don't think this is a good time for your family to be thinking about that, Pat. And it's usually on.
You're reading my mail right now. I mean, Pat, everything you're saying about Tracy, I'm going, yes, that's me.
I know, you have that.
Mm-hmm. And as a very strong Enneagram 1, sometimes it's just that I know, and I'll put language to what I sense later, but I've got to follow this. And everything you just shared so resonates with me, because there's this counselor side of me where I love to sit with people and, maybe we'll be talking about relationships or a conflict, and I'm like, no, but the real issue is this. Have you considered this?
And they say, how do you know? Prove it. And
yeah, it's like, almost prophetic.
I can't.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And then they're like, well, then it must not be real. And it's like, this is so frustrating for a person with discernment. And what's great is on a team or in a family, when people say you have great discernment, let's ask you because your gut is usually good.
Yes.
But if you make them prove it to you, it's like, no, but see, that's not how I think. I look at all these variables. It's not magic. There's these signs and signals. And see, I do organizational health consulting, and you do too. Mm-hmm. When I go sit down with a CEO, I was with the CEO of one of the biggest companies in America, a wonderful company, just the other day. And when I go with the executive team there, I go, you guys, I think this is your problem. And they know what I'm there to do. And they're like, oh my gosh, how did you know? And I go, I don't know. I think I've seen this movie before, or I think I see a pattern here.
Yes. Yes. Uh-huh.
So I look at your results and I go, oh, I could call you and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking about doing. What's your gut tell you? And if you say, yeah, sounds good to me, or, oh, I don't know, something sounds off, I would be like, ooh, let's explore that.
But you know what's interesting? Correct me if I have this wrong. I think this actually might be your words. Because I've read so much of your stuff. Any strength overextended becomes a liability. I don't know if that's you or not. Nonetheless,
it is not me, but okay, I like it.
Yeah, so I've heard this. So just stay here and humor me. Okay, I know this discernment, overextended, under stress, in unrelenting anxiety. Do we then begin to question ourselves and become maniacal, like we're on the hamster wheel, where we perhaps become indecisive even?
Yeah, it's funny. I was just, there's this Bible in a Year podcast that's on right now. This priest reads the Bible. He's in Minnesota, and every day. And in
Is that
a year,
Father Mike?
You can hear Father Mike Schmitz.
Yeah.
Right. And so I was listening to it yesterday. I don't listen to it every day, but I try to listen to it when I can. And he was reading from the book of Sirach. Well, I don't know what the book of Sirach is. The Old Testament is harder. And it was saying in there, like, when you try to do too much, you lose your peace. And you're not meant to do that, essentially. And the man who's busy and takes on more and more and more actually loses his peace. And I think when we press on anything too much, or we force it, it can turn a strength into like the very thing, like, overworking it. And my wife was saying, yeah, because think about it. Jesus didn't go and say, there's more people to heal. I got to keep going. He was like, no, I got to do what God put me here to do. And so, yes, your genius is meant to be used in peace. But if you overwork it, it's like a muscle. Mm-hmm. It's going to break down and tear.
So maybe a quick takeaway for folks joined with us today, Pat, before we continue here, is this. The strength of the working genius enables us, and rather is heightened, when we can work from peace. So in other words, it enables us to focus and really just laser ourselves to a place of recognizing, oh, you want to be in your sweet spot? Do this.
I was just on a Zoom call with somebody an hour and a half ago talking about this, and I'm going to make a book recommendation.
Great.
It's called Searching for and Maintaining Peace. It's written by a guy named Jacques Philippe, and it is probably my favorite book. It's very short, and he talks about how when something's right is when you're in peace, and if you're losing your peace, there's something wrong, and you're supposed to guard your peace of mind and heart at all costs. And so when we're at peace, we know when we're working in our geniuses. And if we're doing work and we don't have peace around it, and we're feeling guilty and self-judgmental, it's probably because we're doing something that we're not that geared for. And then if you know that, then you can regain your peace and go, okay, I have to do this. It's not my genius, but I don't have to beat myself up for the fact that I don't enjoy it. And like my son, Matt, he'll say, hey, I have to go do something outside of my genius. I'm going into the conference room over there. I'm going to shut the door. I'm going to be gone for 2 hours. I'm going to be grinding, and I'm going to come out exhausted. And we're like, okay, good on you. And he comes out, oh, way to go. You got it done. He didn't go in there and go, man, I feel terrible about myself for not liking this. He knows now, I'm not going to beat myself up. It's not my gift.
Wow.
I might have to do it for a while, but I can do it without guilt.
That's profound. That's good.
Okay, so we were at working, wonder, invention, and discernment,
Yes,
the first
sir.
three. So
Yes.
we've gone from 50,000 feet to 40,000 feet to 25,000 feet, We're getting closer to the ground to landing this plane. The next thing, after you discern an idea or something and you feel good about it, then comes galvanizing. And this is the G. The genius of galvanizing. As it turns out, there are people in the world who wake up and love to rally the troops. They don't mind doing it every day. They don't mind constantly going, come on, let's do it, and reminding people and getting them, let's go. We need you on this. They love to sell and inspire and encourage and provoke. That's how we came up with the model. I do not have this as a genius, but I am better at it than anybody else in my company. For years I was. And so every day I would come to work, Chris, wanting to invent and discern. Those are my gifts. And within an hour or two, I'd be having to constantly galvanize. I was pushing. And I said, I don't want to be the chief pushing officer. And they're like, yeah, but you're the CEO. I was like, I know, but I just don't like doing that. And that's when we recognized we had a guy in my team named Cody who had a genius of galvanizing. And I said, you like that? And he goes, I love that. How about being the chief galvanizing officer? And he was like, well, I haven't been here that long. I'm not the most senior person. I don't think I've earned the right to do it. And I was like, no. You have a genius, a God-given gift in that. I want to put you in a job that does that. I can step back. I still have to do it sometimes. I don't have to do it as much. It allowed me to work in my genius, him to work in his genius. Both of our job satisfactions went up, and we got more done in less time than we'd ever done. And that's the key. We're meant to work in our geniuses as much as we can. But if we don't know what they are, then we can't rearrange the work we do to make that happen. So that's how we discovered this model. I was galvanizing all the time, and I didn't know why it was making me grumpy. So then the next one, I want to get through it so we can start talking about it. The next one, after the galvanizing comes the genius of enablement, which is a genius that a lot of people who have it don't really think of it as a genius. And a lot of people struggle with that word, enablement, because they think it's like, you're not supposed to enable somebody. Enablement's a beautiful thing unless you're enabling them around something destructive. So if it's an addiction of some kind or a behavior of some kind, you don't want to enable. But when you're enabling people to do well in things that they want to do and that are good, that's a fabulous gift. And we could not find a better word. It's like they're the people that get things moving by answering the call to action. There are people in the world, Chris, who wake up and when somebody says, I need your help, their eyes light up. And their first thought is, tell me what you need. I would love to help you. And not on my terms. I want to help you. The gift God gave them is they see a person in need and they want to do whatever that person needs. And it's it's not because they're nice. It's not because they're easily manipulated. It's because they have that genius. And I can tell you that because this is one of my working frustrations. I cannot help people very well on their terms. And that sounds terrible. I think, like, what's wrong with me? What I mean by that is when my wife says, Pat, I need you to help me clean the garage, I'm like, oh no. And I go, okay. And so I go to my geniuses, which are invention and discernment. And I go, tell me why you think you need to clean the garage. Let's discern. And she's like, no, I don't want your discernment. And I'm like, okay, let me come up with a system for doing it. She goes, no, I already have a system. I don't want your I or your D. I need you to just stand there, and when I hand you something, I want you to put it where I tell you. That is so hard for me. And then you'll meet somebody else who goes, no, I don't mind doing that. I'll help you on your terms. I just love being the one to help. It is absolutely a God-given skill, and these people are golden on teams, and most of them think they're just nice. But it's a skill, and I've worked with teams that don't have any E, and nothing happens. And they type themselves, and they're like, we don't have any enablers on our team. And no wonder nobody's pitching in. So that's a critical skill, critical genius. And the last one, we'll go to the last one. After that comes what we call tenacity, the T, the genius of tenacity. It's one thing to help other people. It's another thing to wake up in the morning and say, I want to finish things. I want to cross it off the list. I want to meet expectations, hit our number, do it on time, show me an obstacle, I'll push through it. There are people that wake up in the morning totally excited about doing that. You're one of those people. I call that a freak because I don't have any of this. When I write my books, I would have written 0 if I didn't have people with tenacity around me who would make me keep moving. I love the idea. I love writing the beginning. I get through some of it, and then I'm like, I'm ready to move on to the next thing. And then I need people around me with tenacity that said, no, we're not going to let you stop until it's finished, until it's great. We're going to keep you push. We're going to push you and push you and push you until it's done. Thank God for them, because I don't have any of that naturally in me. So you do all these different things. You were telling me, Chris, like, oh, I'm a worship pastor. I consult. I do this podcast. You know, the difference between you and other people is that you have great ideas, but you actually implement them because you have tenacity. And if I didn't have people around me making me do the things I do, I would have a lot of great ideas that probably never got implemented.
Wow. That's so helpful, Pat. What do you think would be most helpful for the folks today joined with us right now? And I'll let you take the steering wheel here. Should we dive deeper into these? Should we go to the pairings? Or do you want to go right to me as an example to folks of really how this plays out in a practical way? What do you think would be most helpful?
Let's do you.
Okay.
I think it's good to have an example,
I do too.
Real person. And
Yep.
I've got your results right in front of me.
Great.
So let's talk about you.
I'm an open book. Yeah, I'm an open book. So
Great.
you feel free to take this wherever you believe would be most helpful.
So your working genius is, by the way, I think all quantitative things are ultimately qualitative. So we have a quantitative assessment that people fill out. It takes 10 minutes.
Yeah, it was quick.
And we charge $25 for it. Dave Ramsey is a dear friend of mine, and he's like, Pat, you could have charged so much more for this darn thing. And we're like, I know it, but we just don't want it to be a corporate tool. We want every 19-year-old struggling to figure out. We want every retiree going, how should I spend my retirement? Wow. We don't want anybody not to take it because it's, more than a couple of coffees at Starbucks or whatever else. So your results, what this indicates is that you're geniuses. You get joy and energy out of tenacity. You like to finish things. You like to push through, and out of discernment. And you like to use your gut. So we call you, your combination, we have a combination for all these people. We call you the judicious accomplisher. Yeah. Judicious being because you have good judgment. You're like, okay, I look at this. I know prioritizing things is really easy for you. Mm-hmm. And saying,
true.
Let's have a bias for action and getting it done. It's not enough to prioritize it theoretically, but you're like, this is prioritized. Now, what's the first step? Let's get it done.
Yes.
And you have angst when you're not sure something's actually going to get finished.
Oh, I do. Yeah.
Right. I do not. And all the judicious accomplishers we know are like, oh, I got to get this going. I know it's the right thing to do, so let's just start and let's finish and let's push through. The other thing about a judicious accomplisher we found is that deep down inside, and this is what people told us, they said, when other people don't pull their weight or don't see the urgency, deep down inside, they're kind of judgmental. They're like, dude, you're driving me crazy. Mm-hmm. That angst makes them want to go, come on, people. And so that is your genius. You're the judicious accomplisher, good judgment, follow through, action, reliable. That's you. Would your wife, your friends, your best friends say that's true about you?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that I have been thinking about in the last couple of days, just because I'm new to the assessment and wanted to create some context in my mind, is regarding, as I've said, the fact that I'm very dominant as an Enneagram 1. So, improver. Ian Cron would say, Chris, you're an improver. Yep, that's definitely true. I see a problem. Like, Pat, I love, in fact, I'll say this from a consulting perspective. I would feel much more comfortable in the COO seat than the CEO seat all day. I I believe every number one needs a number one, number two. And I love sitting down with visionaries and saying, tell me your vision. I'm your strategy guy. I get the juice, as Ken Coleman says. I get the juice from strategy and putting the plan together, improving. So razor sharp attention to detail, maniacal about precision and excellence. But here it is, Pat, unbelievably hard on myself. So when you had mentioned for the judicious accomplisher, when I said yes, but I turned it up to 11 on myself, Pat.
Right. And that's not something you should. That gets to what you were saying before about when you push on that so hard, it can kind of turn on itself.
Yeah.
But the thing about when you talked about like the number two, when that person comes to you and says, "Here's my vision," the first thing you're good at doing is going, "Okay, the first part of that vision, man, that's genius. I love that. The second part, we need some more work on. The third part." Yeah. I think we should change the third. You know what I mean? Like, you don't just say, "Okay, I'll do whatever you're telling me to do." You use your judgment to evaluate it.
Yes.
And then once you evaluate it and they tweak it and you get it to that place, then you have angst, because if it doesn't get done, you're very uncomfortable.
Yeah, checking boxes is one of my favorite pastime activities. I love lists, checking boxes, etc., etc. I mean, I know it may sound a little nerdy, but it really juices me.
That's what people with tenacity have. And you know, one man's trash is another man's treasure. And like literally checking boxes is one of the things we say that T's like to do. They wake up in the morning, they want to have, if you go to them and go, "Here's 8 things to do by the end of the day," they're like, "Ooh, that's an excitement." I would go back to bed. I'd go, "Oh yeah, you're limiting my ability to invent and discern." And you're like, "I'm going to get these done."
How much of tenacity do you think plays into people who fit in like caretaking roles? I'll give you a personal example, and I didn't tell you this when we first met. So my mom battled cancer, terminal cancer, for 18 years. My sister and I. Yeah, she passed away. Actually, it'll be 10 years this November, which is wild to think about because it feels like yesterday. But my sister and I, during the daytime, were really her primary caretakers. And there was this resolve to say, we'll do whatever it takes. Is that where tenacity sort of is made manifest?
Yeah, well, see, and there's this is very interesting. I love this because like a nurse is not a nurse is not a nurse.
Right.
A pastor is not a pastor.
Right.
A CEO is not a CEO is not a CEO. It really depends on your genius. So what you were really good at, and there's other people that would have been paralyzed at this, is like sorting through like which doctor, which care, what do we need to do to help her? And then I'm going to actually provide for my mom what she needs, and I will push through until it gets finished.
Yeah, okay, this is fascinating. My sister did a lot of the personal care. Yes, cooking, cleaning, all that stuff.
That's enablement.
Yeah, I was like, I'll do the meal planning, I'll get it done, I'll make sure this happens, we'll make sure schedules. That was my thing. And even now, by myself, I really find the same things kind of ramping up in my own life. When I can strategize, when I can make a plan for whatever it may be, there's a sense of I'm right where I need to be.
Right, and the plans you come up with are very practical, and they're going to work.
Yes.
I mean, and I say that because it's true. Your results make that very clear. And so you were solving problems and getting things done for your mom, and your sister was responding to her in the moment needs.
Yes.
And that's a beautiful connection. Now, I'm an inventor discerner.
Okay.
I'm the person that you'd come to and go, "We don't know what to do."
Yes.
And I'd go, "Have you thought of this? This would probably be pretty helpful." And wait, you know, I heard once about this thing. You know what you should do? You should talk to a couple people around this. Mm-hmm. And they'd be like, "That's great. Can you help us do it?" And I would say, "Yes, poorly." And you probably shouldn't count on me because I'm really not good at the execution and the follow through, which is not an excuse. It's an admitting of what I'm not great at. If that's my mom, I better do it as well as I can, but I'm not going to be as good as another person.
Okay. So when I look at angst, one of the things, maybe to the tenacity part of me, that frustrates me more than anything, for which I then develop resentment, is when I don't feel like I'm being taken seriously. I don't mind being candid with the folks here, but I mean, Pat, there's a level of resentment that grows in me when I don't feel like the ideas and the strategies, like I'm being taken seriously for it.
Oh, see, and did you hear me say before about the judicious accomplisher? They said to us, hey, and we have this really sweet person, Julie, who works with us, and she goes, no, I judge people inside all the time. I get really frustrated at people who don't realize, I know it needs to get done. I know we need to start and get this started now. Why are you not listening to me?
Yes, you nailed it.
And it's actually, and that's really not a violation of pride in this, because a DT is the person you go to and go, tell us what's the smartest thing to do here and get us started. And what we really ought to do is listen to them. So when somebody goes to them and they say, this is really the right thing, they go, yeah, I don't know about that. They're like, oh gosh. You know what I mean? So it is frustrating to you because what they're doing is they're not appreciating your genius. And I mean that. Mm-hmm. If we were talking about a totally different activity, I would say, oh no, they shouldn't appreciate your genius, Chris, because you don't have it in that area. But you're the guy that would go, I figured it out. I got a plan. Let's get started. Please trust me. This is what's going to work.
Please trust me. That's it, Pat. Yeah, you nailed it. This is interesting. And as I had mentioned earlier in the conversation, one of the things I found puzzling to me was that one of my working frustrations is an area for which I do it often and I do it well. And I'm just like, wait a minute.
Is that galvanizing?
Let me look
or invention?
Here. I'm going to open my... It would be invention.
So here's the thing, and Matt and I were talking about this morning. Matt helped us develop the tool, him and Tracy and Cody and Karen. So we can be good at things that are in our frustrations, especially if we were made to be when we were younger or if we have wounds. Because let me tell you something. So remember I told you E and T, enabling and tenacity were my weakness. They're my frustrations. That means my dad used to wake me up and say, Pat, follow me around the yard, and I'm going to tell you what to do. And then I want you to do it well. I'm going to rake up a pile of leaves. And what I would have preferred is him to say, Pat, see the backyard? I want you to go figure out what you need to do. Come up with your own way of doing it and think about what would look great and how would you do it? Because that would mean like I get to come up with new ideas. I get to use my judgment. And I didn't get to do that. But you know something? I got straight A's pretty much my entire life. I always did what the coach and the teacher and my parents said. And I finished things. And it was totally counter to my character. I did it because I was going to get affirmed for it, and I had wounds that said I needed to be affirmed. I never felt comfortable saying, hey, I'm not good at that, so it's okay if I don't make that. So I was good at all 6 of them, but they weren't my geniuses. And that's a really dangerous thing, because we are meant to go, hey, you know, there's probably people that would be better at this than me, but if you force me to, I can get really good at it. But do I wake up and say that's the first thing I want to do? No. So for you, it might be that that's a talent, but not necessarily a source of joy and energy. Now, if you're saying, man, I love. We had a guy that said he didn't have tenacity. Tenacity was in his last one. And he said, this can't be right. We said, why? And he goes, I went to medical school. And we're like, wow, he got through medical school. And then we said, did you love it? Did you enjoy it? He goes, no, I hated it. I couldn't wait for it to be. We're like, okay. So you can push yourself to do certain things. It doesn't mean you should.
Oh my gosh.
Does that explain it?
Yep. And now I'm going to need, 30 minutes to kind of decompress after this podcast interview, because I've just got to think what happens is, and this is what I'm getting at, folks, lean into this. Many of us, Pat, are being motivated by, and here we are back to the mental health component. So many of us are being motivated by anxiety, languishing, apathy, et cetera, cynicism, bitterness, whatever. And we've been in that. Yes, shame, of course. We've fear, and I think fear is the dominant motivator in this conversation. I think many of us have lived in this state for so long that healthy, functional, sweet spot in the juice, in our working genius, is indistinguishable from the normalcy we've been experiencing thus far.
Yep.
And in moments like this, it allows us to pedal out a little bit to say, hold on, wait a minute. What have I been calling normal? What have I been calling thriving? What have I been calling my best spot? What if I've just actually been running at 6,000 RPM for so long that I've not stopped to breathe to recognize actually what I'm good at. I don't know. What do you think?
Chris, oh, no. So many people have said that. And it's so there's actually so I was growing up, my family didn't understand who I was and what I was good at. Mm-hmm. And they didn't come from a socioeconomic background that could understand that. They didn't come from a psychological background, education, all those things, emotional. So I decided, well, if I'm going to get any attention, I better get good at the things that they appreciate. I didn't even know what my geniuses were. And I grinded through every single thing and coming to terms with what gave me joy and energy, which were the gifts God gave me. And I will say, I'm very grateful for this. I discovered it 2.5 years ago. And I was 55 years old, and I'm so glad that at age 55, I got to be freed up for this. Other people, I hope they do it younger. There's going to be people that are 72 that are going to say, hey, I get to spend the rest of my years doing something that I actually am meant to do. So our wounds can cause us to do things out of fear, fear of anxiety, fear of shame.
That's it.
And we're not meant to live that way. God wants us all to know how he made us and to be the people, as my friend Matthew Kelly likes to say, to be the best versions of ourselves. So...
Well, what I hear knocking on the door of working genius then, and this speaks to two qualities that you've really just, I think, added value to all of us for so many years, and that's trust and vulnerability. When we're talking about interpersonal relationships, when we're talking about discovering and empowering others in their working genius, and then, of course, receiving the empowerment from others, I hear trust and vulnerability knocking on the door of the heart. What's your take on how trust and vulnerability, the presence or the absence of either, really affect this conversation and our overall well-being?
It's funny. Humility is rooted in trust and vulnerability. That's at the root of it. And people think humility is like this false modesty or self-flagellation. Humility is just the acknowledgement of what is true, right? And the best definition of humility I've ever heard is, there is a God and I'm not him. And it's okay, so what does that mean? It means, I am good at some things. I'm not good at other things. I make mistakes. I can acknowledge those. And the problem isn't the making of the mistakes. It's the inability to say, oh, I made that mistake and I'm really sorry, and to atone for it, and to accept yourself through that. And this test, this assessment and the book that goes with it is meant to help you let go of the shame and the guilt for yourself and the judgment of others, because we don't understand how we're made. Otherwise, we're going to go through life. And we've had pastors, this is so great because you're a pastor, write to us and say, I felt guilty for being a pastor, like I was a fraud and a sham. And they said, because I'm not good at writing a sermon. I'm just not good at it, writing homilies or sermons. And I didn't know why, but I thought, if I'm not good at that, I probably shouldn't have been a pastor. I'm just faking it. And then they took the working genius and they said, I don't have wonder or invention, which are those ones that are like, my wife is a wonder and inventor. She's called the creative dreamer. And she lives up there in those ideas. Well, they have an easy time writing a homily or a sermon. And we looked at his results. I said, well, do you like counseling and helping people and supporting the team? And he's like, yeah. I said, well, that's a pastor too. You just need somebody with different geniuses to help you write your homilies and sermons. And he was like, oh my gosh. So there's a reason for this. I'm like, no, there's other pastors that are great at writing homilies and they're actually not that good at counseling. And they're feeling like a fraud. And it's like, why don't you sit down with a bunch of other pastors and go, what are your geniuses? What are mine? What are your frustrations? What are mine? Oh, isn't that great? God made us this way. And like, even in your church, you said you're a worship minister, but you might have a gift in areas that go beyond music and worship, that they could go, hey, we should tap into that. I had a team do this, Chris, an executive team of a huge technology company. And they were really struggling because they couldn't come up with great technology. And they hadn't for 10 years. They had been selling legacy products and they were really stuck in the past. And they took this assessment and nobody on the team had wonder as a genius. In fact, it was worse than that. Most of them had it as their working frustration. So basically, when somebody they didn't like it. And the CFO said, that's the problem here. None of us wonder. Nobody ever says, maybe the market's headed in a different direction. Maybe our customers don't like what we have. Maybe we need to rethink our product. They were always grinding on the details, and nobody gave them any space to wonder. Then the next part gets even better. On that technology team, only one member of the team had invention as a genius. Only one. And it's a technology company, and they were struggling with innovation. And they're like, there it is. And you know who the person who had invention as genius? Their lawyer. The chief legal counsel in a technology company was the only person that had a natural affinity for invention. You know what they did? They changed his job and gave him responsibility for technology acquisition. He was so excited. I found out a year and a half later, they took him out of the legal department altogether and put him in charge of new technology because he discovered it. He didn't do it when he went to law school. He didn't do it earlier in his life. He's like in his 40s, and he's like, I love this.
Yeah.
And they said, why don't we free you up to do that? Oh. And that serves the organization. It serves him. So the point here is there's not, some people who like marketing like it for different reasons than another. Some pastors are good at something. Some parents are. Some teachers are. If you don't know what your gifts are and your frustrations, you can't tailor your work to do the best you can.
Wow. Well, as we're landing the plane in this conversation, I think one of the conversations I've had a lot with coworkers, clients, et cetera, is around how do I step into a place of being in alignment? Talk about what it means, Pat, to be in alignment. If there were tent stakes to hold this thing of alignment up, what would they be?
Yeah, I love that word for some reason. I don't know
why.
I
do too. Yeah, I do too.
There's something peaceful. It's like alignment isn't like an active, you can't force alignment. Alignment seems to me like where things settle. And first, the thing we have to be aligned with is, I believe is God. It's like, hey, and I was talking to someone about this 2 hours ago. His will, not mine.
Yeah.
Surrender to what he says is right. Don't force it based on what you think is right. And that's easy to say, hard to do. But the more we do that, and what does that mean? It's like, well, what do you have for me today? What did you indicate to me would give me peace and that I'd be good at, that I can serve you? And then whatever happens today, let me align with that and accept that. There's this prayer app I use called Amen, and it's free, and every day I listen to the readings of the day and the psalm and the gospel, and it's really cool, and you get to contemplate that. And at the end of it, there's this thing he says from St. Paul. He says, "Rejoice always, pray without ceasing, and give thanks in all circumstances." And what comes after that, I love. He says, "For this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you." And I realized, oh my gosh, if whatever happens, God actually wants me to accept that and give thanks for that and rejoice, that's kind of permission to align with his will instead of mine. And the world today tells us, no, you pull yourself up and create the reality you want, and essentially your will be done. That's a recipe for angst and a lack of peace. And this gets back to I know this sounds like a sermon or something, but
I love it.
Yeah, Jesus said, the world's ways are not my ways. And the world we live in today is saying, you create things for yourself. You force your will. It's all up to you.
Self-creation. That's it, Pat.
And when you go, your will, not mine, wow, is that liberating. And he's already shown us his will. Your genius is like, God, this is what you wanted me to do. Oh, let me do that. Wow. Let me just put those talents at your disposal in the service of others. And then the true success comes, and there's peace there.
That's so good. Okay, here's where I'll land, and then I want you to tell folks how to get a hold of this assessment. Listen, folks, I want you to take this. I really believe it'll help you in your personal life, in your professional life. And as Pat said, $25. I mean, what a great investment that you should make. So anyway, here's where I'll land, Pat. In this conversation around working genius, there's a lot of talk right now about people quiet quitting. In fact, I'll bet there are a lot of people joined with us today who are right there. Maybe they've lost passion for what they do, or maybe they're sick of the dangled carrot and just the broken promises. That's really frustrating. How do you coach those people in light of their working genius? In other words, what's the key to navigating this with character and integrity? Because that's a big deal.
I love that because it's easy for me to judge this quiet quitting thing. It's easy for me to be the grumpy old man, like, these kids today, but, and some people need a kick in the butt.
Yes,
some
sir,
people are like, you got to work, you got to try. And if you're quiet quitting, you're just cementing your own future. But some people just have never actually known where they're going to get joy and energy. And it's not going to be in the comp plan of your company, and it's not going to be in your manager's opinion of you. It's going to be in aligning what you're doing with the things you're meant to do. So sometimes don't quiet quit. Discover what you're meant to do and ask yourself, does this job allow me to be the person I'm meant to be?
Yes.
And then go find the role that allows you to use that. Oftentimes it's within the organization. You can go to your manager and just go, something, I've been frustrated lately, and I realize it's because I'm really good at some things and I don't use that here. And this organization could be better if I did. And so I'm not telling you have to, but I would love to give more. And here's how. We had a guy who said he was going to a performance review. He knew it was going to be ugly because he hadn't been doing well. He goes there, he takes the assessment the day before, he brings it, and he says to his manager, hey, I just want to show you something. This is what I learned about myself yesterday. And the guy looked at it and said, well, yeah, it's no wonder you've been struggling. You're in the wrong job. He literally said, I got promoted instead of demoted or fired because he was a good fit for the organization. They just had him in the wrong job. He goes, that was the best $25 I ever spent.
Yeah.
And so I want people to go out and take it too. To do that, go take the assessment. You go to workinggenius.com. workinggenius.com. It's very easy to go through it and do it. It takes 10 minutes to answer the questionnaire. And I promise you're going to look at this and you're going to go home and you're going to say to people, like, look at this. Oh my gosh, look what I've just discovered.
Yes.
And share that with your team and your friends and your family. It will yield so many insights and help us to avoid unnecessary guilt, shame, and judgment.
That's so good.
And we just released a book that goes along with this.
That's
I wrote it 2 years after this came out, called The 6 Types of Working Genius. And it's a fable about a guy who struggles in his life in this way and how he applies it in his home and his family and his company first, and even like going to church and volunteering.
It's so good. Hey, recap that real quick. Tell people how to connect with you on social. Obviously, there's the podcast, which is great. We'll put links to all of this in the show notes, folks, at wintoday.tv. But one more time,
there's a
Pat,
Working Genius. Yeah. There's a Working Genius podcast. If you go to Working Genius podcast, you'll find that.
Yeah.
And that's, we talk about the various aspects of this. Workinggenius.com is the website. Now, the company that I run and where we work is called the Table Group. So you can go to tablegroup.com to learn more as well. But workinggenius.com is where you can go and take the assessment. That's the first thing I'd say. Wonderful. Because I just can't wait for people to have their lives changed by doing what they're meant to do, what God gave them.
Pat, this has been a riveting, enlivening conversation to me, and I've respected you for so many years, and it's been a joy to finally meet you. I'm so thankful for today. I appreciate you. Me too. I can't wait to be in Detroit one day and get to spend a day with you. I'd love to do that. Thanks for being here, Pat.
Hey, God bless you, buddy.
All right.